Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Zip Chat. This is Jill Hurston, Marketing Director at CenterZip. With that, I'd like to introduce our host of Zip Chat, Mike Watson. He is the VP of Engineering at CenterZip. So, Mike, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thanks, Jill, and welcome everyone to this new version of our Zip Chat. It's episode 9, Data-Driven Product Management, or Leveraging Metrics in Product Management. Today we're going to be talking about how data can be used to influence product management decisions in various areas of the product management process. Today, joining me is Tim Rourke. He's product manager at Intertech Alchemy. I have Sarah Torres with me, VP of Product Management at Square Root, and then also Michelle Arney, who's a technical consultant and specializes in product delivery. Great panel today. I'm excited about it. As Jill said, this is intended to be a casual panel discussion, and we definitely like audience participation. So please, if you have a question, let us know, and we'd be happy to get you on and chat through any ideas you have. So with that, let's get into the topic a little bit. So my background, as people may have known from watching some of these Zip Chats, is as an engineering leader, mostly helping build products, the software, the QA, all of that. And I've had the opportunity to work with many product managers in my career. And of course, I have my opinions about what makes a good product manager, what makes a bad product manager, and about feature selection and all of that. Although I haven't done it a lot myself, although recently I have had some opportunity to do that. But one of the things that I think is interesting is when I was talking to Rich Mironov, who's a product management consultant and a respected colleague, he was saying that what he thinks is the biggest waste in software is building the wrong thing. And I think everyone on this panel would agree with that. And that's kind of what we're here to avoid. So let's get into a poll first. Let's start kicking off the poll. And that poll is, do you use metrics or other empirical data to make decisions on your roadmap? Feel free to enter stuff in there. Not too hot, which is great. It's a good time of the year.
Okay, Mike, it looks like we have everybody voted. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll.
All right, thank you, Jill.
And there are your results. We got about 50-50.
Yeah, so that's about what I would expect. Not too surprising. Obviously, customer feedback is really important, unless you're maybe building the iPod and you're trying to do something totally different than ever been done before. All right, so moving on from there, I'm going to target my first question at Sarah. So I first learned about Sarah a couple years ago during a talk at an Austin CTO conference that I attended. And she had this great talk about how Square Root, the company she works at, was getting engineers and everyone in the company involved in talking to customers about the product, which I thought was really cool. And I'm glad since then we've had a chance to work together more closely. And so here's the question I have for you. So what data do you collect other than that obvious customer feedback when you make feature selections?
So the obvious, the customer feedback for sure, and it's both a mix of qualitative and quantitative. I know the topic of the meeting today is really around data and metrics, and we do that. So one of the things that we'll do is we will talk with customers and with prospects to have them grade ideas, and we'll get great survey results out of what designs and concepts they like best. But without the qualitative input into that, it's really hard to interpret those. So for example, we were designing a new product a few years ago that we thought would have heavily to do with initiatives. Folks loved it, graded really highly. But as we dived into the details of exactly how folks were saying they would use it, everybody kept saying, yeah, I'll use this on my next visit to a dealership or my next visit to a store. And that was so consistent, it became actually obvious that we were pointed ever so slightly in the wrong direction because we didn't know what to ask. And so by kind of tuning directly in that direction to aim the initiatives at the visits workflow, we ended up with something that could really be operationalized that was going to be effective for folks. And then on the flip side of that, as we started designing the visits product more, and we had all kinds of visual ideas, we put them in front of folks, and a very typical response from a user in a feedback session is, "That's cool." It was really hard to distinguish between I would absolutely buy that in a second, "That's cool," and "Okay, bless your heart, that's cool." And so we also frankly had people grade those. And so that combination of both in one's own words, what they think, how they would use it, really kind of putting it into their own lives, matched with something more rigorous that's measurable, for us has really worked out well.
Sarah, did you find more success there with like in person, with surveys, with like customer advisory boards? Like, where did you find you got the best metrics from?
So in-person's tricky for us. We're a tiny company and we work with customers all over the country. And so, and they're very specific customers. We're not B2C, we're B2B. And so we need to really be talking to specific folks who are often not in Austin. So what we did was a lot of phone calls. If it had been now, we would have probably done more Zoom, but at the time it was just pure phone calls. Folks are usually happy to get on a call for 15, 20 minutes. We'd either share a screen in, GoToMeeting or what have you, or we'd send a document ahead of time with pictures, and we'd say, okay, go to page 1, go to page 2, what do you think? And that works pretty well. I really like the phone or, some other medium with a voice for getting the tone. I think it's really interesting to get the feedback of, "That's cool," versus "That's cool." The tenor of it gives you a sense of whether somebody's really excited or whether there's something they're not saying that you can then dig into further. So for that reason, I like doing things live as much as I can, as opposed to a static survey monkey.
Sarah, I'm curious, could you expand a little bit more on your scoring system? How do you take "that's cool" and turn that into a quantifiable number that can then be used to make really good product decisions?
We just have people grade it. So, I say, pretend you're back in, high school chemistry. Is this an A+ concept? Is it a B-? Is it an F? And I really kind of open it up for folks to just kind of like give it whatever grade you think it deserves, then help me understand why.
That makes sense. So one of the things, from my perspective, again, not inside the product management world, but looking in from a window, it seems like there's a lot of ego-driven type decisions. At least that's what it appears like. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure it's ego-driven. I've never worked with anybody who, is kind of parading around saying, mine is the most important decision in the building. But I do think that everybody's got biases and lenses that they may or may not recognize or know how to compensate for. So if we go talk to sales, they're going to have a very natural perspective on prioritization based on the world that they live in. If we go talk to engineering, they're going to have a very different lens, and neither of those is wrong. And I wouldn't want to attribute it to ego, but the way that we kind of work through that is we actually, as a product team, try to account for each of those. And as we're talking to folks, we give them space within the prioritization process to be able to really articulate, why do you feel that way? What metric are you trying to move? And so for sales, they'll say, well, obviously I'm trying to increase revenue, and so I think this is the most important. And then that allows us to kind of create a spreadsheet that kind of walks through, like, all right, let's kind of order these things by revenue. Then we go over to engineering, and they're like, well, obviously I'm trying to improve quality. Great, let's give you your own space to kind of look through that. Let's grade each of those concepts accordingly. And we have all these different lenses that ultimately align with what the groups care about and what the company priorities are. We'll then weight them based on what's really important for the company this year. And what we end up with is what could be used, and I've worked with some folks who really want to use it as a mathematical way to determine what the roadmap is. But what it really is, I think, is a nice way to illustrate through every lens how priorities shift. And that then allows us to be flexible and saying, well, if we want to achieve a couple of these goals and some are more important than others, here's what are the best bets, or here are the things that actually hit across a number of different fronts. And what I've shared here is a very genericized version of that, essentially showing for each of the ideas, they've got kind of these different lenses and then the weightings based on the company goals, and they add up to something that's not necessarily deterministic, but should give some data to the conversation and really respects each position that folks are coming from.
Is there a way for you to reflect, like, I need this now versus I need this?
Yeah, I mean, there can absolutely be an urgency column. I mean, I think that there are, so what I've shown here is essentially like 1, 2, 3 type scores. You can also do Fibonacci type stuff to be able to indicate that this needs to, this is a much bigger, more urgent issue. There might also be, a separate column that accounts for this is really important, but only if we do it by a specific date. And I think differentiation often fits into that, kind of category where the competition is coming and we're either going to get there first or we're not. And it's one of the reasons why I don't think this is a purely math exercise, but it enables kind of the elements needed to have a really good conversation.
Sarah, one of the things we struggle with on our roadmaps is a freshness scoring, right? Because you get a lot of good ideas that come in, but after a while, I think to your point of if you do this by a certain time, but if it's been lingering on your roadmap for so long, it becomes a stale idea and maybe either less valuable or the value changes. How do you reflect that in your scoring system?
I don't. I think that each idea should just be looked at with a fresh lens. Even if it's been out there for 2 years, maybe it's been out there for 2 years because it's been technologically feasible or we've had other priorities, and it still might be a great idea. I think a lot of the re-injection of freshness into it comes where if you want to go do the thing, to then reassess what's the design, what are the requirements, and kind of to do that new, and so to not necessarily take the designs and concepts that were from a couple of years ago. But I don't know that really good ideas age out. And some of them actually, I think, take some time to mature and be ready in the organization. So it's not something I explicitly account for.
So how much do you take in like engineering feedback in this process?
Tons. So engineering has its own input because they also have a perspective on the world. They see where we have opportunities to be faster, move ahead of the competition, take advantage of new technologies that are out there. If it wasn't for engineering, we wouldn't be moving to containerization, and that's been huge for us, right? That's not something that folks from other parts of the organization would have ever brought up. And also, they're huge on sizing. They're big on, hey, did you know these two things are actually under the covers very similar and we should do them together? And so they're both an input to it as well as a partner in really crafting how do we think about what it takes to do these things.
Yeah, that's great. So moving on a little bit from the topic of backlog scoring, which is really interesting, I want to talk a little bit about how product management and how they can influence, throughput, quality, those types of things, because I think they're a big player in that, whether product managers know that or not. So Tim, question for you. What data do you look at to help with that problem? Like, or at least solution, maybe it's a solution, right? Like, can you use data coming back from the team to figure out how your team can work better with them and, gain a better partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a self-described data nerd and a recovering project manager and a current product manager. And in our world, we're just inundated with information, especially coming out of our tools that we use. And us being a Kanban team working in a greenfield space, I get a lot of great data that comes back in. So what I look at as a product manager is a balance between leading and lagging indicators to help me understand what's the capacity of the team, is the team working at, above, or below that capacity. And then I often call myself like the perpetual 5-year-old because I ask why a lot. Like I'm constantly looking at the curves and it's like why? And I'm not always looking for problems. A lot of times I'm looking for opportunities. If the curve moves in a way I didn't necessarily anticipate, I want to be able to pick that up and say, okay, what do we do right? And I want to bring that back to the team just as much to say, we're doing this good thing right. How do we do more of it, as opposed to we're doing something wrong? How do we do less of it? Engineering teams get picked on a lot. And Mike, you probably know this better than most, is very rarely do product managers come back and say, hey man, look at all the great things you guys did, unless it has dollars and cents tied to it. A lot of times it's how do you work faster? I like to look at those opportunities to say, hey, look how we did work faster, and let's point those out and let's make sure we celebrate them. So, when we take some of those things and break them down, right, leading and lagging indicators, lagging is probably the thing we get the most of, and you can look at last week's throughput, and I often do. I also run trend analysis, so I take a look at things on a 6-week trail, and I'm looking at also the balance of work, to engineering tasks, stories, which I equate to roadmap progress, and bugs. Right, there's always bugs, and you get a bug backlog that gets built up. So I try to look at the balance in between those three. How fast are we getting them done, and how much of it is actually sitting out there. But you also want to create a balance and look at leading indicators. And the ones that really jump to mind that I spend a lot of time on are what's blocked on our Kanban board, how much of our backlog is ready. So I talked a little bit, I was curious on Sarah's perspective on the freshness indicator. And when you think about a ready backlog, right, this is work that is sitting there waiting to be picked up by an engineer in that Kanban setting. And if it waits for too long, then you actually have a staleness factor that comes in. So I can't have my ready backlog be too big. I can't have it be too small. If it's too small, then I run the risk of not getting enough work into the pipe for my engineers.
Mm-hmm.
So those are probably my two fine points around throughput metrics.
Gotcha.
And what are you doing for the freshness component? I mean, are you reevaluating as they each come through? Like, what's your approach to handling that? Because I do think it's an issue, because it's, at the time we put something in, it might be a net new thing to hit the market, but by the time we actually get to it, 3 other people have done it. It's less exciting now, right? Like, we'll just do what they did, right? Do we do it or do we do that? Yeah.
Yeah, or what you thought was the right thing is slightly different. So you need to even change the way the requirements define. Maybe in the spirit it's the same thing, but it's in practice it's a different outcome. Yeah.
Yep. So there's always a subjective view of that, and I try my best to make sure that gets layered in as much as the nerdiness of my analytics side. But I actually take some of those throughput metrics and I use those to calculate about how much work needs to be sitting in my ready backlog for about 2 weeks. And then I have my staging backlog. We call that our initial grooming set. And I like to have about 6 weeks worth of work in that. And that's work that's being actively elaborated. And then I've got my true backlog, stuff that we haven't really picked up yet. So I take those throughput metrics of the team on that 6-week trail and I calculate what's 2 weeks worth of work, what's 6 weeks worth of work. And then I make sure that I've got both of those buckets filled to that 2 and 6 week level. If I go a little high, that's okay. If I'm a little low, that's okay. If I'm extremely high or extremely low, then it gives me indications of problems. And I run those every single Monday morning. It's my Monday morning ritual, 6 a.m., fresh pot of coffee. Let's go look at the metrics and see where we sit for the week. And it's my way of just clearing the way of now what are the things that I as a product manager need to focus on for that throughput side going into my week.
So I have a little bit of insight in your product, Tim, but are you finding that that's preventing starvation?
Yes. Yeah, we have had 0 issues with starvation since we took over. Now, we have had issues with things getting backed up. And so the issue we bumped into was that staleness factor where we slowed down on our throughput. And so I built up that backlog and I built up that readiness and it was all ready to go, but the team slowed down. And it was a transition in between releases. And then now all of a sudden I've got all this work that's ready to go. And then it started to get increasingly stale. And even today, I was looking at some things in our backlog that were really, really good ideas. And as we've evolved, because we're greenfield, so good ideas tend to pop up really quick, and then they run the risk of going stale. And I had an engineer pick something up and look at it, and he called me. He's like, "There's no way. We can't do this." I looked at him like, "You're right. There's absolutely no way we're doing this. That would have been a great idea 2 months ago, but that time has come and gone." And so it created a little bit of churn for us. So you run the risk because we got out of sync, and the metrics, I got a little too far ahead, and then the team slowed down, and then now we had a bit of a blockage we had to sort through. Looking back, if you look at all my charts and all my data and all my metrics, it tells that story very clearly. It's very crisp looking at it on the back end, but it now forces me to take that information and now look forwards and say, how can I prevent these problems in the future?
So I'm curious, it sounds like you've got a lot of rigor and accuracy in the forward looking. Does that enable you to share with customers with a level of comfort, or do you still kind of hold back on some of the projection of when things will be ready?
It gives me confidence at a quarterly level. I try not to get any more granular than that when we go external. I find that gets a little too precise, and there just carries a little too much risk with that. So at a board and executive level and at a customer level, we tend to put our projections out quarterly. Within the team, we stay closer to monthly, and that gives us a little bit of breathing room so that we have the flexibility to take in some of those high priority urgency items, or if we've misunderstood complexity within a task, we've got wiggle room. Either way, right? It can be faster, it can be slower, but I like to make sure we have that wiggle room in place. But from a commitment standpoint, at a quarterly level, yeah, I feel really good about it. If the team slows down, I also feel really good about being able to go back to the customer and say, hey, something's delayed. If we're speeding up, I haven't had the opportunity yet, but I'm looking forward to the opportunity to go to a customer and say, hey, we're going to deliver early. So.
Right. And have you used that at all internally to influence things like staffing and engineering, to be able to show your data and say, hey, this is what we know we can get through. You want more, like we know what that takes now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you had a chance to use your data to influence those decisions?
Yeah, I'm extremely transparent with my metrics and my dashboard. So we use the Atlassian tools, and so Confluence, and I actually post the metrics dashboard every Monday morning for my whole team to look at. And so that's everyone in my leadership chain, plus my team all the way down to every engineer. And then we talk about it bi-weekly at our retrospective so that everybody else has the opportunity to be that perpetual 5-year-old and ask the why question and see if we can find those opportunities together. And then everybody knows every Monday they can pull the metrics up. And some people look at it as, how do we do? Some people look at it to say, what do we need to do this week to make that curve go the way I want it to go?
Right.
Yeah, that sounds great. In fact, the next question I had for you is, related to the natural tension between product managers and engineering. And, I was interested in your opinion on, how you address that. Like, how do you keep the teams working cohesively? Because ultimately, that's how you get the best throughput in my mind, which is always of concern to me. So, what are your thoughts there?
That's the challenge, right? Because anytime somebody sees a metric, they immediately want to know what the goal is, and they immediately want to know your action plan to hit that goal. So the first thing that I do in product management is I do the very non-metrics thing, and I make sure I've established good faith with my engineering team. And I think it has to be built on that foundation. Everyone within the team needs to know that we're in this together. We win together, we lose together. We're all a cohesive team. And so the metrics become as a tool for us to continually evaluate our progress and our success and identify, again, areas of success, areas of improvement. Establishing that good faith isn't easy, but when you do have it in place, you do find that people look through the lens of metrics a lot differently. So they're not seeing that 6-week trailing throughput, and they're looking at it as a report card that's being sent to your parents that tells you how you did in class today. They're looking at it as more a real-time indicator of where were we last week, and is there a good reason behind it, right? Did our throughput drop last week because we had 6 people on PTO because there was a significant holiday in my particular country? Well, I mean, that's a reasonable expectation. Did our throughput spike because we had things blocked for 6 weeks and now we pushed a whole bunch of stuff through in a production release, and wow, look at that success, right? There's all of those reasons as well. But it forces the team from a top-down perspective to truly ask that why question. And as the owner of those metrics and the person who often leads the conversation, I try to lead in with those whys instead of doing the finger pointing or asking for the action plans, so that we all take that introspective look and say, this is what the team's really doing.
So I'll admit some challenge over my tenure in product in getting good estimates. And especially really establishing the level of trust needed in order to do that, and to have folks willing to engage in the estimation process, not feel like it's going to come around and be punishing at the end. I'm curious how y'all have established good trust and a good approach for creating those estimates.
So we actually we do a no estimates methodology. And so in order to do that, we did have to build trust with each other, and we have to go in with the understanding that a ticket or a story is as big as it needs to be. And it's an ongoing conversation to establish that level of communication, that bidirectional communication, so that if we put a ticket through the process on the product side, engineering picks it up, I need them to know, and I constantly reinforce that they have the ability to come back to me and say, this is too big. I need it to be smaller, and here's my reason why. And if that's the case, 99% of the time we say, okay, right, we break it apart, and now we have 2 tickets or 3 tickets or 4. And that gives them the capability to move things through at the level that makes sense. The only requirement I maintain is that any ticket needs to be a shippable feature. So there is such a thing as too small, and if we break it down past the point of shippable feature, then it doesn't work. But there is such a thing as a requirement that's too big. So that's where that directional communication comes in. Now, I have a decent technical background. I'm not as good as Mike, and so I have a pretty good understanding of how things are going to work. But I don't necessarily know all the underpinnings. And so something that seems hard at a product level oftentimes is very easy at an engineering level and vice versa. And so having that input from the engineering team to come back and say, you know what, let's make this bigger, let's make this smaller, and give them an opportunity to weigh in on how do we structure the work, and also knowing that we have good faith in that the metrics are telling us how we're doing, really creates a lot of that good cohesion within the team.
So I get that at a ticket and a feature level, given kind of the annual planning, you know, that kind of I was walking through of like, well, should we really embark on this giant refactor or building a mobile app, or, you know, or that type of thing where there's maybe a decision to be made of like, should we even embark on this? Can you speak to that kind of estimates process with the dev team?
Yeah, so we focus in again at that quarterly objective level, and so we look at ours. We're a greenfield product, and so right now our objectives are very clear, and we have certain things we need to do in order to get the product shippable, and meet the objectives for our CapEx budget. And then as we continue to roll forward, I'll probably shift more towards what you're doing, Sarah, on that backlog scoring. And then I invite my engineering team to take part in the backlog scoring just as much as you do, or to the level that they want to, so that they're comfortable on this is an achievable thing. When we try to keep the estimates conversation out of it, it inevitably comes into play, but we don't have a formal system for doing that.
Yeah, my understanding of the no estimates theory is, since estimates are going to be, inaccurate most of the time, if you can come up with some way of identifying the number of things that you have to do and then just give them a kind of a common scoring, then you get the same benefit, but you still have to talk about the features. So
right.
You're sort of doing estimation without actually, putting a number next to it, in a strange way. And it works better when you don't have to commit to things. Like if you're working in a Scrum process, it's not as easy to do than when you're working in Kanban, where in Kanban, things are allowed to be as small or as big as you want, and they release when they release, so to speak. So there's nuances in, I think, Tim's process that makes it possible that may not be possible in other places.
And it may not be possible as we mature either. That's something to be determined. We have the luxury of starting from a blank sheet of paper right now, and we don't have an established product out in the marketplace. In 6 months, I may be faced more with that challenge and have to come up with a solution for it.
Yeah, perfect. So let's go to another poll. This poll, the question is, do you have a method to evaluate how successful your roadmap selections have been? So this is sort of looking back when you do a release, maybe you have a themed release, did it actually accomplish what you had hoped? And Tim, I noticed your Kanban board on the wall behind you. Is that for you or is that for the kids?
That was actually for me. I was doing some road mapping for Q1 and Q2. Since I don't have a giant whiteboard in my office anymore, I had to make do with sticky notes and glass doors.
Seems really practical. Yeah, nice.
It was admittedly fun.
Mike, I'm going to close the poll. Are you ready to view it?
Yeah, let's look at the poll results. Perfect.
Like, didn't you adopt the Kanban kid management system?
I did, yeah. All right, so either we don't set success criteria or we do, but we are not able to reliably evaluate it. Perfect. Yeah, I would, based on my experience, that's kind of what I would expect. It's a noble goal. We want to do it, but it's hard. I think it is a hard thing to do and have the discipline to do. Because once you pass a release, you want to go on to the next thing and get that done as quickly as possible. So totally makes sense. So I'm going to pull Michelle into this conversation. Michelle, so how do you know that you're building the right things? Like how would you measure that?
Right. So going back to kind of what Tim said about building that trust and confidence with the engineering team, I actually find the post-release metrics actually can really help with that relationship, because as you said, they kind of tend to be the end of it, and then they hear maybe the challenges that didn't work, or hey, you took the system down, or hey, no one's using that feature. Great, but why, right? So really taking a look at adoption rates from a qualitative metrics, right? How much pent-up demand was there? How much insight could adoption rates give to getting SREs ready or support ready to support? Because if it's coming on board slowly, great, they have a little more time to get ready and be successful themselves. So I think there are a lot of kind of post-launch numbers that can help with that. Downtime tends to be one of the hot buttons that comes up, but I would say normally it's looked at from how much did you cause versus how much did you reduce. And I think those post-launch metrics can help with that as well. These new features or things that went out actually had folks less downtime in between. And how does product help elevate that, and all towards that goal of one, relationship building, but also validating the business investment, because sometimes it's less obvious that reducing a pain is actually a benefit. And I think the things that you can circle back into the system there really help tell that story across the process of the journey and why it's still a win, right? You may not have done as many features, you might have done more internal updates and technological changes that needed to be done to the infrastructure. And hey, here's the result of that. And here's why it even matters, even though a customer might not actually be able to click a button that validates that that was a good thing. So I think, really capturing those ahead of time. I kind of mentioned you can look at session usage times, and some folks are like, hey, great, our numbers are up. And I think knowing before you go in whether things like that are a good thing or a bad thing, knowing what are your parameters, what should they be? If they're spending more time, is that because there's a problem? And is that an engineering and usability problem, or something that came in the design side, or is that a post-launch thing? Like, we don't have the right documentation, we don't have the right marketing components to help that customer journey to move them faster through the pipeline. So I think there's a lot of different metrics you can implement, but most importantly, predefining those, knowing what you'll track and what you'll do with that data, for me, is kind of what takes it to the next level versus data for data, right? We can all interpret what we want, but if we know that our goals are, hey, we want to, session time should be between here and here, or downtime should be between here and here, and if it's not, this is what we're going to do about it, and defining that ahead of time, I think reduces some of that tension later. You already have kind of outlines of plans of action, if things are going well or not going well, and all of that circles back, I think, to help the business and validate that investment, but also help engineering understand what they're bringing to the table, which is often very good for them. But again, we don't close that loop and remind the internal teams the value of that work that got done. So,
Michelle, do you ever circle back with your engineering teams 6 months or a year down the line and talk to them about revenue opportunities or click-through rates or heat maps that show how these things are being used once they've had a chance to be in the market for a while?
Yeah, and I think that's it, right? Like, how long do they have to cook before the information is valuable? But I think that's 100% goes again back to what I would feel accountable in product, and both communicating up to the leadership team on, hey, this is a valid investment we made. But I think it's important in that connection with product and engineering that they also know the value and validate the event. They did a lot of work, or it took longer than expected, and that's all they heard is, hey, you slipped. There's just so much value in it coming back and saying, hey, by the way, 6 months in, this is our adoption rate. This is how people are really using it based on the metrics that we have. 25% of folks are on board. We expect 50% in the next 3 months. So staff up SRE or staff up support so we can be successful. And close that loop. And honestly, being vulnerable to the fact that, hey, not everything works, and it's not always an engineering problem. Like, it's out there, it works fine, but we don't have the right documentation to support it. And we've identified that now. We're going to pick that up, right? So
I'm curious if a metric gets missed. Let's say, you'd anticipate that the adoption of a new feature would be at 80%, it's really at 60. How do you decide whether the number had been set wrong, whether the 80 wasn't inappropriate, number, or whether it really is and there's something needed in order to drive adoption up.
Right, and I think that's where we'd steal some of the tips and tricks that you use from the survey perspective, right? Is the adoption not there because there wasn't built-in backlog and built-in interest? Or is it not there because they can't figure it out? Like they get it, they install it, or they upgrade to the new version, but they're like, I don't get it. Doing that, if we're not hitting those numbers, going back and double clicking in to figure out, like, was our assumption wrong, or is there something in the system that's preventing that next 20% of adoption? Did the market move around us and now it's just maybe less critical for what we had anticipated? But I think if you're not hitting those metrics, you set them for a reason, that you should go figure out why. It's, in theory, they're not arbitrary. We put a lot of hard work into helping define what we think the market needs and why. And I think if it's important enough to put up as a metric and a KPI to track, then it's definitely important enough to go back and figure out, like you said before, like if we even hit it out of the park, like, oh my God, what did we do right that we didn't expect to do right? And how do we do that again? Or where is the blocking? Is it, it's just too much, it's too hard, it's too complicated for them? Is it, we did a great marketing push up front and got the first folks on board, and then we kind of dropped off, so the newer folks that are now ready for it don't really realize it's out there? I think there's certainly some areas to dig into post-launch to determine that. So if you're not hitting your metrics, I personally would go back because I know I put a lot of time into working with the teams to figure out what that metric should be in the first place.
Yeah, just knowing
conversely,
why. Sorry.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was going to say, knowing why you were off. Being off is one thing, but knowing why, I think, is really critical. Because then you either can tune your radar for the next time, or like you said, there might be an underlying problem that you didn't understand the dynamics of how that thing was going to work, and finding that out is useful too.
Yeah.
So conversely, if you knock it out of the park, how do you attribute the success of that to the things that got done? Because it's probably a number of different activities that all happened in concert, and ideally, if there's one thing that's really meaningful, that's a great efficiency to identify. Do you put effort into discovering that, or right now is it a matter of if it's working, great?
No, I think it's important to look at either way, again, because we track metrics because they matter, good, bad, or ugly. We want to understand what we do with that data instead of just look at it and say, yeah, that's good. Like, great, if it's good, then what? Or if it's bad, then what? So from that point of view, I think it's important because it could give you insights into, hey, it's actually better because the market moved around us and is actually now more in our favor in this area. It could be better because sales has started selling into a new industry or a new vertical, and that's really ramping up that part of it. So I think finding out why you're successful is just as important to understand, like, okay, great, so sales now picked up finance, and boy, they're really loving this thing. And that wasn't maybe part of your input before because it wasn't necessarily a target market for you. I do think even if it's a win, you have to know why it's a win too.
Yeah, so one of the things you said early on, and it really struck, hit with me, is you have to be intentional about metrics. Figure out what you're going to measure and start measuring them as early as possible, because without the data collected, the metrics don't mean anything. So I just want to make sure everyone really thinks about that part, because what I see a lot of times is I join a team, I want to start establishing metrics, and nobody has a framework for doing it, and it really makes it difficult to evaluate anything other than people's opinions at that point. So be very intentional is what I would say. So one other question here, Michelle, for you is, so a lot of times metrics really kind of has two different flavors. It has the how do we do things better, but then it's like how do we validate that we're good at what we're doing? And usually that second set goes up the chain, right? Like, so how do you tell your CEO or the board or like whoever is interested that, hey, we're doing a good job in product management, and you should believe in us. Is there any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've hit on some of those. I mean, obviously, when you're selling up the food chain, right, your number one is metrics, revenue, increase in revenue, new markets that you've entered, are those being successful or not? I would hope that you're doing that intentionally, but sometimes we get lucky. I mean, let's be honest, that we stumble into a good market opportunity, but I'd like to think we did a release that was targeted at a certain vertical, and we can show that we nailed that either through increased adoption, downloads, revenue, service fees, and that component, because that is going to be their number one question. But again, I also like to make sure that we're showing the value of what we just did and validating the investment that was made. So with this release, we may have invested, 5 months and this much time or manpower, and here's what the outcome of that is. Adoption rates are up by X. Customer support tickets are down by X. And really showing that business value across all of the different areas to where we can contribute. So.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Any thoughts on that, Tim or Sarah? No.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I do have a question from the audience.
Yeah, we have a question from Sabu. Sabu, I'm going to unmute you. If you could ask the question, that would be great.
All right, thanks. So the question I have is, as product managers, do you have to sell the backlog? We talked about backlog. Everyone, each one of you talked about prioritizing the backlog and all that. So did you have, as a product manager, did you have to sell the backlog to the team members for picking up in the development? So how do you do that? Because sometimes the team is not very motivated to take up a backlog because of the complexity. It's too huge. It cannot be squeezed into a 6-week release cycle, whatever. Could be multiple reasons. So did you ever face that situation to sell it or have a challenge in selling it to the team? Anyone can answer. Thank you.
A lot of storytelling. The session that Mike discussed, kind of having first met me at, I talked through the way that we bring developers into customer conversations directly. There is nothing more motivating, I think, than having an end user tell you about how their life is really difficult right now and how the thing that you're going to do is really going to help them. And we played that through. We had the team join literally hundreds of phone calls and meetings with end users and stakeholders, and it made a huge difference. The engineers were talking among themselves about, like, this is really going to help Jack next Sunday. And that then became the reason to do things. It wasn't doing things because I, as product, said that we needed to, or doing it to go help the customer who they heard from directly.
Yeah, similar to Sarah, we do the same thing. We haven't brought our engineers into customer conversations yet, but what I do is actually, when I meet with customers, I'll oftentimes record the session and then give the recording back to the team. And what I've started doing recently is I literally take a picture with the customer with their permission, and I post it up on our Confluence page. And so when I'm telling the user story, I tell the story as like, Jerry is going to go through and use the product in this way, and they've seen a picture of Jerry. They know what his store looks like. They've seen me and Jerry together, so we know Jerry's a real person. But on top of that, I find that in order for it to be on the backlog, I need to clearly understand the why behind it and the value that goes with it. And to build on Sarah's point about storytelling, I have to be able to tell the story as well. And so to help with that, we meet minimum once a month during one of our grooming sessions, and I tell the story of what's coming in the roadmap and what's coming in the backlog to give them that rolling perspective. And then I have an open door policy. If anybody wants to ask me any question anytime, I say, shoot me a Slack message, give me a call, email. If you're in town, stop by, and let's talk it through so that you get clarification on what we're doing and why. And I feel like if I can't tell that story, then it probably doesn't need to be on the backlog. And if there are questions and challenges about it, conversely, I want all that input because there may be something I haven't thought about yet that now makes it even more valuable than we thought before.
Yep, that's great, Tim.
Yeah, sounds good. So let's do one more poll as we close out here. And this one's really just to get to judge people's interest on this topic. So how do you think any of these topics that we've talked about, and there's really 3 sections here, need more attention? If there's one that you would like to hear more about, let us know. And Sarah, and as a result of that process that we were just talking about, where you got the engineers involved with customers, did you see an uptick in customer satisfaction, or some other metric that you measure there?
We weren't tracking that from the perspective of customer satisfaction. We were really looking at internal metrics, but developer engagement and happiness, which we track every sprint, did go up. The
that's
devs
great.
felt like they were actually part of a process and really building to something bigger, which we know helps with just life satisfaction and retention and team cohesion. So it had a lot of internal benefits for us.
Yeah, that's a great side effect, actually. That's awesome. All right, so we're kind of all over here.
Sounds to me like you get to come back, Mike.
Maybe, yeah. So this release success topic got the most votes, so maybe that's something we should focus on in the future. Awesome. Just checking to see if there's any other question. I think we had one other question that came in. I think the person has dropped off, but I'd still like to answer it. So how do you, the question is really, how do you manage, like if you have multiple products, like how would you manage prioritizing across them, basically? Like you have share, common set pool of engineering resources, but you got 2 products. Have you dealt with that problem? Any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, we do that every year. So we set an annual plan that decides as a company what are the priorities and what are the right ways to solve that. And that might change the balance among the different products. Once that's set, we use a herds model, and we'll reshuffle the herds so that we've got the right people, the right size teams, and the right skill sets working against different things. And so it's evaluated periodically and kind of stays within that balance until we intentionally reprioritize.
Makes sense.
I'm glad it's so organized for you. Say most places we tend to kind of push and pull, right? At least with the central leadership that you're providing, I think that really helps. It's other organizations, it's a little bit of me too, or mine, and a constant battle throughout the year. And I think some of the information both of you provided earlier on kind of how to rank and measure could really help out in some of those situations that have been maybe more challenging.
Yeah, so have, they talk about scrums of scrums, where scrum
Yes,
teams
are they
like have that same kind of concept for products of products, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. All right, well, I think that's it for today. I really appreciate Tim, Sarah, Michelle, your participation here. I think it was an excellent conversation. Hopefully the audience enjoyed it as well. And I want to thank the audience for joining, and everyone have a great day.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.